Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I was showing you the 5 things you need to know if your loved one is confused, agitated and delirious in intensive care. You can read the blog by clicking on this link. In this week's episode, I want to answer one of your most burning questions that many of our readers and listeners have. Does my critically ill loved one in an induced coma or with head injuries feel my presence? I think that this is really one of the big mysteries for families in intensive care, and it's a question that most people ask who have ever had a loved one critically ill in intensive care. There are probably very few occasions in life where you feel more frustrated, irritated, more out of control, powerless and vulnerable besides having a loved one, family member in intensive care. On top of that, your critically ill loved one's future is often uncertain and you don't know what's around the corner really. Therefore, you and your family are trying to stay afloat amidst the critical illness of your loved one. You have many questions running through your mind, and one of those many questions is whether your critically ill loved one can feel your and your family's presence while they are in an induced coma or while your critically ill loved one is recovering from a severe head injury. The bottom line is this. Generally speaking, your critically ill loved one may not necessarily show a great deal of obvious responsiveness to you being at the bedside and holding hands and talking to your loved one. Of course, the level of responsiveness generally depends on the depth and the length of the induced coma. Again, generally speaking, your critically ill loved one may show a response that is more linked to opening eyes, restlessness, or showing signs that they don't like having a breathing tube in their throat. As a rule of thumb, most critically ill patients in intensive care don't remember much, if anything, after they have come out of intensive care. Having said that, I am personally a big believer that if family members are present at the bedside in intensive care, holding hands and talking to their loved one is very important, and besides critically ill patients not remembering any details about their stay in intensive care, they do remember loved ones being present and talking to them. I do believe that even though your critically ill loved one may not remember the details of their stay in intensive care, holding hands and talking to your loved one can only support your loved one's recovery, and you should listen to your gut of what's right in your specific situation. If your critically ill loved one is recovering from a severe head injury or a severe head trauma, things might take a bit longer, and you and your family and the intensive care team probably need to be very patient. It can take a little while until your critically ill loved one is waking up. I have written a few related articles here that help you getting through this difficult time. One article is "What is an induced coma and why is my critically ill loved one in an induced coma?" The other article is "How to take control if your loved one has a severe brain injury and is critically ill in intensive care." And the other article that you can read by clicking on the links on the written version of this blog is "How long does it take to wake up from a traumatic brain injury or severe head injury?" I hope that this blog helps you to get through the difficult time when your loved one is in an induced coma and obviously can't hear you. If you still feel that you have no control, no power, and that you can't influence decision making whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, sign up for your free membership now and download your free Instant Impact Report by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you'll also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability, even if your loved one is dying. 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get crucial behind the scenes insight so that you understand what's really happening in intensive care. How you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. With your free instant impact report, you'll also get 4 other free reports, and the reports you will be receiving are: the 6 questions you need to ask the most senior doctor in intensive care, 10 things you didn't know doctors and nurses are talking about while you're not at the bedside with your loved one, the 7 answers to the 7 most frequently asked questions if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, and 9 myths of being a critically ill patient in intensive care. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week with another update.